One room, one machine, one vision, lines of code. Then, Bill Gates. The world changed.
The spark of a vision. In 1975, a Harvard dorm room hums with the sound of a teletype terminal. 19-year-old Bill Gates and his friend Paul Allen lean over printouts, eyes alight with excitement. Paul Allen excited. "Bill, have you seen this popular electronics January issue?" They built a computer kit, the Altair 8800. Bill Gates wide-eyed. "The Altair, a computer anyone can own." "Paul, this is it? The future we've talked about." Paul grinning. "It's a $400 kit, switches and lights, but it's a start." Bill voice racing. "If everyone could program a machine like that, imagine a computer in every home on every desk. We have to be part of this revolution." Paul nods, and the two young programmers share a moment of electrified silence. In this tiny dorm room, Gates sees beyond the clunky metal box on the magazine cover. He envisions a world transformed by personal computing, a vision so clear and bold that it will ignite a half-century legacy. That night, Bill Gates and Paul Allen decide to do the unthinkable: start a software company to make this vision real. In Bill's mind, the future is knocking and he's ready to open the door. Coding the future. This is the story of how a visionary coder predicted and shaped the future. Bill Gates. Coding a Legacy is a journey through the life of a young Seattle computer whiz who grew up to revolutionize the world. Twice first, by co-founding Microsoft and putting a PC on every desk and in every home, and later, by channeling his tech-born fortune into solving global problems. From anticipating the rise of personal computers and the internet, to spearheading innovations in global health and climate. Gates has always been one step ahead. In the following minutes, we'll witness pivotal moments of Gates's foresight: the birth of Microsoft from a dorm room dream, the battles and breakthroughs of the software age, and a second act that uses technology to save lives. Through imagined dialogues, first-person reflections, and cinematic scenes, we'll see how one man's vision shaped our modern world and how he continues to code a legacy for the future. Buckle up for an inspirational, insightful, and at times humorous journey through the life of Bill Gates, the man who predicted tomorrow and then set out to build it. Early sparks, a nerdy childhood in Seattle. Bill Gates' story begins in Seattle, Washington. Born October 28, 1955, Bill was the only son in a tight-knit competitive family. His father, William H. Gates Sr., was a prominent attorney, and his mother, Mary, a businesswoman and civic leader. Dinner table conversation often turned into friendly contests. The Gates family loved to win, whether at board games or sports. This atmosphere stoked young Bill's ambition early on. Small in stature and occasionally bullied as a child, Bill found refuge and reward in learning. He was a voracious reader with an intense curiosity. At age 13, he enrolled at Lakeside School, an elite Seattle prep school that would change his life. In 1968, the Lakeside Mothers Club fundraiser purchased a time-shared computer terminal for students, a clunky teletype Model 33 ASR connected by phone line to a distant GE mainframe. For Bill, it was love at first bite. He wrote his first program on that machine, a simple tic-tac-toe game that let you play against the computer. Watching the computer execute his code perfectly was mesmerizing. This was something he could control, something that made sense. Before long, Gates and a few fellow computer nerds, including his older friend Paul Allen, were inseparable from the terminal. They'd skip classes, even lunch, to program. In one incident, Gates and his friends found a bug in the system that granted them free computer time and exploited it gleefully until they were caught and banned for the summer. Instead of giving up, the resourceful teens struck a deal with the computer company. They'd help find bugs in exchange for free hours on the machine. Bill's childhood was a cycle of such mischievous brilliance, always pushing the boundaries to get more programming time. One early program Gates wrote for school was a class scheduling system. In a sneak preview of his competitive and quirky streak, he modified the code to place himself in classes full of girls. The 17-year-old Gates cheekily ensured he was the only boy in many of his classes, so he could be surrounded by female classmates. As Gates later admitted with a laugh, "It wasn't that I could talk to them or anything, but they were there. I was particularly inept at talking to girls." The stunt didn't improve his dating life, but it did become part of Gates' lore, showing the humorous, nerdy resourcefulness that would characterize him. Those college years further shaped his worldview. Musk didn't party much. He was more likely to be found in the computer lab or deep in thought about big problems. It was during this time he mused on the 5 critical areas for humanity's future: the internet's sustainable energy space, AI genetics essentially writing the script he would later follow. Classmates recall him as intense and exceptionally driven. He wasn't just trying to get good grades, he was plotting how to change the world. They earned a few dollars and more. Importantly, confidence. Gates later said that trafo data actually got him what he needed to start Microsoft. It was a first taste of entrepreneurship and collaboration with Allen. In 1973, Gates left Seattle to attend Harvard University. At Harvard, his penchant for intense focus continued. He sometimes slept through morning classes after all-night coding sessions. He even devised an efficient class schedule that left him with stretches of free time, often spent in the computer lab. In his sophomore year, he took one of Harvard's toughest math courses, Math 55 and upper-level computer science classes. But the pull of real-world computing exploits was stronger than academia. Gates would famously score a near-perfect 1590 on his SAT and excel at college, yet never finish his degree. A greater destiny awaited. The birth of Microsoft. Microsoft is born 1975. It was during his Harvard days that fate came calling, literally. In December 1974, Paul Allen, who had moved to Boston to work, rushed into Gates's dorm, brandishing the January 1975 issue of Popular Electronics, the Altair 8800, heralded as the world's first mini-computer kit. For under $400 for years, Gates and Allen had dreamed about the day computers would be affordable to individual hobbyists. Now that day had arrived. Gates's mind exploded with possibilities. When Paul and I saw that cover, we knew 2 things. The PC revolution was imminent, and we wanted to get in on the ground floor. The Altair 8800 was just a primitive kit. No keyboard, no screen, just switches, lights, and a lot of promise. But Gates had the foresight to see what it represented. He and Allen immediately contacted MIT, the small Albuquerque company behind the Altair. They boldly offered a groundbreaking proposition: software for the Altair, specifically a version of the basic programming language that could run on this microcomputer's Intel 8080 CPU. There was one small catch: Gates and Allen had no such software ready. When MIT's founder Ed Roberts expressed interest, they had to race against time to create what they'd promised. Gates dropped out of Harvard, and over the next 8 weeks, he and Allen worked day and night to write Altair Basic, essentially a way for users to program the Altair. They divided tasks. Paul worked on a simulator of the Altair's Intel chip on a Harvard PDP-10 mainframe, while Bill and a hired friend, Monty Davidoff, wrote the basic interpreter and math libraries. Memory was scarce. The goal was to fit the whole basic interpreter in just 4 kilobytes of memory. Gates showed a genius for scrappy optimization, squeezing code until it was like a ship in a bottle. He later called this period the most fun challenge of his life. In March 1975, the duo traveled to Albuquerque to test their software on an actual Altair. As the story goes, Alan loaded the tape, the program ran, and the machine printed ready. Their BASIC worked on the first try. It was a triumph, born from youthful daring and sleepless dedication. MITS agreed to license the software. Altair BASIC would be sold with the Altair 8800. For each copy sold, Gates and Alan would receive a royalty. As the two young men celebrated, they also formalized their partnership. On April 4th, 1975, in Albuquerque, they founded Microsoft, named for microcomputer software, with Gates as the first CEO. They would later drop the hyphen to become Microsoft. Little did they know this was the dawn of one of the most influential companies in history. In a letter to his parents at the time, Gates wrote that he was at the right place at the right time. But it wasn't just luck, it was vision, Gates. And Alan saw what others didn't? That software could be as important as hardware in the coming computer revolution. Gates even took the unusual step of asserting the value of software intellectual property. In 1976, frustrated by widespread pirating of Altair BASIC among hobbyists, the 20-year-old Gates wrote an open letter to hobbyists, arguing that software should not be free, that developers deserved to be paid for their work. It was an early sign of Gates's shrewd understanding that software would drive the industry. By 1977, Microsoft, now relocated to Gates's hometown Seattle area, was a few dozen employees strong, and Gates, just 21, was a driven, no-nonsense leader. He was known to review every line of code, often rewriting pieces himself. Legend has it that in those early years, Gates would memorize his employees' car license plate numbers so he could track who was in the office and who left early. "I knew everyone's license plate." He admitted to monitor productivity until eventually, "I had to loosen up as the company grew." This intensity earned him a bit of a tyrannical reputation, but it also set Microsoft on a course of relentless high standards. Gates's foresight was already in evidence. He had a mantra for Microsoft's future. "Our dream is a computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software." It sounded ridiculously ambitious in the 1970s, when computers were still novel gadgets for geeks. But that vision would come to define the next 2 decades of technology. Bill Gates was intent on making it reality. A computer on every desk. Microsoft rises in the PC era. In 1980, Bill Gates made one of the most consequential deals in tech history, one that showcased his strategic foresight. Tech giant IBM, preparing to enter the personal computer market, approached Microsoft for help with programming languages. During discussions, IBM also mentioned needing an operating system. Gates didn't make hardware or operating systems at the time, but he didn't let the opportunity slip. He recommended another company for the OS. Then, when IBM couldn't reach a quick deal with that company, Gates boldly offered that Microsoft could deliver an OS instead. Microsoft swiftly acquired an existing simple OS from a small firm, essentially buying it outright for $50,000, and adapted it into MS-DOS, Microsoft Disk Operating System. When the IBM PC launched in 1981, Microsoft's MS-DOS was the operating system running on it. Crucially, Gates negotiated a non-exclusive licensing deal, meaning Microsoft kept the rights to sell DOS to other computer makers. This was a visionary move as clone PCs emerged. MS-DOS became the standard software platform, and Microsoft grew explosively. By his mid-20s, Bill Gates had become a centimillionaire riding the wave of the PC boom. Through the 1980s, Microsoft blossomed from a startup into the dominant force in personal computer software. Gates took Microsoft public in 1986 at age 30 and became a billionaire within a year. He was at one point the youngest self-made billionaire ever. Money, however, was never the sole driving force for Gates. It was a byproduct of winning the game. And Gates loved winning inside Microsoft. He was known for his blistering intellect and uncompromising standards. If a program manager's proposal didn't impress him, Gates wouldn't hesitate to call it the stupidest thing I've ever heard. He challenged his teams to think bigger and work harder, often turning red in the face during debates. Yet, he could inspire fierce loyalty. Many early employees believed wholeheartedly in the mission to put a PC in every home, and they saw Gates working as hard as anyone to make it happen. The GUI and the rivalry. Windows versus Macintosh. By the mid-1980s, Gates had another insight. Graphical user interfaces GUIs were the future of computing experience. The idea of using a mouse to click icons in menus, rather than typing arcane commands, had been pioneered at Xerox PARC in the 70s and then popularized by Apple's Lisa and Macintosh. In the early 80s, Microsoft had initially partnered with Apple to develop software, but Gates saw that Microsoft needed its own GUI-based operating system to remain on top. Thus, Microsoft Windows was born. Windows 1 Nero launched in 1985 as a clunky add-on to MS-DOS. It was far from perfect, even laughable by comparison to the Mac. Steve Jobs of Apple was furious. He accused Gates of copying the Macintosh's look and feel in a now legendary confrontation. Jobs berated Gates for theft. Gates, cool under fire, supposedly replied with wry humor, "Well, Steve, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV, but I found out that you had already stolen it." In one line, Gates deflated the tension, pointing out that Apple had also borrowed from Xerox's ideas. The remark became tech folklore, exemplifying Gates's wit and clear-eyed pragmatism. As the 80s closed, Microsoft hit its stride. Windows 3.0 and especially Windows 95 became massive hits, finally bringing an affordable, friendly GUI to the IBM PC-compatible world. The timing was perfect. Millions of households were ready to buy their first computer, and thanks to Gates's vision, most of them ran Microsoft software. By 1995, Windows was on the majority of personal computers, and Microsoft's annual sales topped $6 billion. Gates, still only 39, was named the richest person in the world with a net worth north of $12 billion, a title he would hold for many years. But along with success came scrutiny. Microsoft's aggressive tactics, integrating its software into every PC, pushing out rivals, started to draw the eye of regulators. Gates utterly focused on winning paid little heed. At first, he later quipped, "I was running Microsoft, and I didn't understand law." The 1990s would soon test Gates with a lesson in power and responsibility. The Internet tidal wave. Gates predicts the web. As the world entered the 1990s, a new technological revolution was brewing: the Internet. At first, Gates, like many, underestimated it. Early on, Microsoft was slow to build Internet features into its products, focusing instead on the ongoing Windows and Office juggernaut. But one thing about Bill Gates, he learns fast. When he finally got it, he moved with trademark intensity. In May 1995, Gates penned an internal memo titled "The Internet Tidal Wave." In it, the 39-year-old CEO sounded the alarm within Microsoft, declaring the Internet the most important development since the PC. The Internet is a tidal wave. It changes the rules, he wrote bluntly. Gates saw that this network of networks would soon touch every business, every home, every life, and he was determined that Microsoft would not be left behind. The memo marked a strategic pivot, a recognition that browser software, online services, and Internet-enabled applications had to become core to Microsoft's strategy. Microsoft, under Gates's direction, sprang into action. It launched Internet Explorer to compete in the browser market. Windows 95 was quickly followed by an update that included Internet Explorer 1 GU, and later, Windows versions tightly integrated the web browser. Gates was effectively steering a software behemoth to do a rapid about-face, like a battleship turning on a dime. And, remarkably, it worked. By the end of the 1990s, Internet Explorer had become the dominant web browser, and Microsoft had extended its PC monopoly into the new realm of the internet. Yet Gates's aggressive tactics in leveraging Windows to win the browser wars would sow the seeds of his biggest challenge. The U.S. Department of Justice and 20 states filed an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft in 1998, accusing the company of abusing its monopoly power in PC operating systems to squash competition. The case United States v. Microsoft became a high-profile drama with Gates at its center. Trials and tribulations, power fallout, and reflection. In 1998, Bill Gates was deposed as part of the antitrust case. The world saw a side of him it hadn't seen before. On grainy courtroom video, Gates gave terse, evasive answers and played semantic games under questioning. He quibbled over the definitions of simple words. Compete concerned we, earning him little sympathy. The judge at one point chuckled in disbelief at Gates's non-answers, and footage of Gates's cocky stubbornness hurt Microsoft's image. It was a rare stumble. The press smelling blood painted Gates as the archetypal monopolist out of touch and above the law. Later, Gates would insist that his combative deposition was a defense against lawyers twisting his words. Did I fence with the DOJ's lawyer? I plead guilty rudeness to boys in the first degree. Gates joked afterward, acknowledging his own testiness. But the damage was done. In 2000, a federal judge ruled that Microsoft had indeed violated antitrust laws, using its Windows monopoly to unfairly stifle competition. There was even an initial order to break Microsoft into two companies, though that was later reversed on appeal. The whole saga was a humbling moment for Gates. It's said that he was genuinely shocked by how negatively he was perceived in the trial's aftermath. Gates's response showed a maturation of perspective. In the middle of the legal battles in January 2000, he made a dramatic decision. He stepped down as Microsoft's CEO. He elevated his longtime friend and right-hand man, Steve Ballmer, to CEO, while Gates took on the role of chief software architect to focus on technology rather than day-to-day business. Many saw this move as Gates recognizing that Microsoft, and he himself, needed to change. The company needed a less controversial face, and Gates perhaps needed to reflect on the responsibilities that come with immense power. Indeed, around this same time, a profound shift was happening in Gates's personal mission. The relentless competitor who had spent 2 decades obsessing over code and market share began turning his attention to philanthropy. Influences were converging his mother Mary's example of community service, the birth of his first child in 1996, making him think about the kind of world the next generation would inherit, and the simple fact that he had amassed unimaginable wealth. By 1999, Gates briefly became the world's first person worth over $100 billion, so a centibillionaire, even after considerable charitable donations. He later remarked that at a certain point, wealth beyond a reasonable amount has no utility for oneself, so it better serve others. From tech titan to philanthropist. In 2000, Bill Gates and his wife, Melinda French Gates, cemented a new chapter in their lives by founding the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This would become the world's largest private charitable foundation, with an endowment that eventually reached over $50 billion. Gates transitioned to its work gradually. In 2008, he left his full-time role at Microsoft to devote most of his time to philanthropy, and in 2014, he stepped down as Microsoft's chairman. By 2020, he exited the Microsoft board entirely, symbolically closing the Microsoft chapter. Now his full-time job was saving and improving lives around the globe. But perhaps SpaceX's most breathtaking innovation was mastering reusability. Musk often quipped, "Launching rockets is the only time you build a $60 million vehicle and throw it away each flight." Imagine if airplanes were thrown away after one use. Tickets would be really expensive. He was determined to land and reuse rockets. Many said it was impossible or Where is the news about these 500,000 kids dying? Gates realized that the suffering of the world's poorest was invisible to most Americans. The article revealed a massive market failure diseases, like rotavirus, malaria, and tuberculosis, were killing millions yet because they mainly affected poor children in developing countries. Little R&D or attention was devoted to them. Gates was shaken. In that moment, his problem-solving instincts kicked in. Here was a solvable problem if only resources and innovation were applied. Bill reading the article, voice trembling. 500,000 children. Every year from a virus I've never even heard of. How is that possible, Melinda? Gentle but firm. If it's not in the news, it means no one with a megaphone is talking about it. Maybe no one with money is working on it? Bill determined. Well, we have money. We have brains. We can do something. We have to. This is why we were given so much. This awakening led Bill and Melinda to establish their foundation's focus on global health. One of their earliest major grants funded the development of a rotavirus vaccine and its delivery to children who needed it. They also became key backers of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. Gavy Gates applied the same analytical rigor to philanthropy that he had to software identify big impact leverage points, invest in R&D measure results, and collaborate with the best minds. Under Gates's leadership, the foundation took on diseases of poverty, malaria, investing in bed nets, new drugs, and research on a malaria vaccine, HIV, AIDS funding, vaccine research and treatment expansion, tuberculosis, polio, and more. The goal wasn't modest. It was to eradicate some of these diseases from the face of the earth. In 1988, polio paralyzed about 350,000 children a year worldwide. By 2021, thanks to global vaccination efforts, which the Gates Foundation heavily supported, there were just 6 cases of wild polio in the world, a 99.9% reduction. We stand on the brink of making polio only the second human disease. After smallpox ever eradicated, Gates often cites this progress as one of his most gratifying achievements. The foundation's work expanded into other areas too. Supporting agriculture in Africa, funding education initiatives in the US, improving sanitation, and more. Bill Gates transformed from a software executive into something of a global problem solver. He would spend hours in remote villages listening to healthcare workers, or in labs with scientists absorbing data and asking the kinds of sharp questions only he would. Those who met Gates in this realm often commented that he was like a walking encyclopedia of public health statistics. Importantly, Gates also influenced his peers. In 2010, he and billionaire investor Warren Buffett launched the Giving Pledge, encouraging fellow billionaires to commit at least half their wealth to philanthropy. This effort has recruited hundreds of the world's richest to publicly pledge philanthropy. Gates, once viewed warily as a monopolist, began to be seen as a leading voice for what tech-driven philanthropy could achieve. As of 2025, SpaceX has made space cheaper and more accessible than ever imagined. Its legacy might one day include humans setting foot on Mars. If and when that happens, it will be in no small part because Elon Musk dared to ask, "Why not?" when everyone else said, "That's crazy." In a famous 2015 TED Talk, Gates demonstrated the risk of a global pandemic by releasing a jar of mosquitoes on stage, a dramatic stunt to underline the threat of malaria and infectious disease. "There's no reason only poor people should have the experience," he quipped as the audience gasped. Clarifying the mosquitoes were not infected. That mix of showmanship, humor, and foresight was classic Gates, making people feel the problem to stir action. Technology for good, foresight in global challenges. Even as a full-time philanthropist, Gates never stopped being a technologist at heart. He has consistently looked to innovation as the key to solving big problems. In speeches and annual letters, Gates often makes bold predictions about global progress. And many times he's been proved right. In 2014, he predicted that by 2035, there would be almost no poor countries left in the world due to continued aid and innovation. In 2015, he forecast breakthroughs in agriculture that could make Africa self-sufficient in food by 2030. He also championed the potential of mobile banking and digital finance to uplift the poor, predicting that these tools would help people transform their lives within a couple decades, a trend well underway with services like M-Pesa in Kenya. In 2019, speaking at Cambridge University, Gates struck an optimistic note about global health. He predicted that by 2040, global malnutrition will be solved and malaria will be virtually eliminated if the world continues to invest in scientific innovation. He confidently told the audience, "I'm able to predict the future because I see all the amazing discoveries in the works right now." This wasn't hubris. It was the same data-driven confidence that led him to foresee the PC revolution. Gates was privy to cutting-edge research, the way he once was to upcoming microchips. In that speech, he noted advances like new malaria vaccines, gene drives to eradicate mosquitoes, and nutrient-fortified crops all on the horizon. Climate change became another arena for Gates's foresight. Always a believer in energy innovation, he founded TerraPower, a company developing next-generation nuclear reactors for carbon-free energy. He also launched Breakthrough Energy Ventures, a fund backing innovators in clean technology. In 2021, Gates published How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, a book brimming with realistic yet hopeful predictions for how the world can reach zero emissions by 2050 through new technologies in energy generation, storage, and efficiency. True to form, he mapped out the problem, the green premium costs of current clean tech, and envisioned a path to overcome it with invention. He's put substantial investment behind direct air carbon capture, advanced biofuels, and other moonshots, betting on the power of tech to bend the curve of climate change. OpenAI. In 2015, Musk co-founded the nonprofit OpenAI to promote safe artificial intelligence research, driven by his worries that AI could pose risks if unchecked. He has since stepped away from OpenAI's board, but his involvement underscored his belief that AI is a double-edged sword, incredibly powerful, but in need of ethical guardrails. Interestingly, in 2023, Musk started a new AI company to further pursue AI in a way aligned with his vision. He urged the world to prepare systems to respond to epidemics the way armies prepare for war. When COVID-19 did hit in 2020, that TED Talk went viral as people marveled at Gates's prescience. Gates became a significant funder in the fight against COVID, investing in vaccine development and manufacturing, putting his money where his mouth was. It's important to note that Gates's predictions aren't magic. They stem from analysis and expertise. He has described how he spends time each year with scientists, reads voraciously, and seeks out knowledge, much as he did learning new programming languages decades earlier. His foresight is the product of a curious mind that has been trained to synthesize information and spot big trends. Whether it was realizing in 1975 that software would unlock the potential of personal computers, or realizing in 2015 that a pandemic was a matter of when, not if, Gates has an uncanny ability to see the picture on the puzzle box when others are just holding pieces. Legacy and the road ahead. As of today, Bill Gates stands at an unusual crossroads of history. He's in his late 60s with the boyish, bespectacled face, now lined by years of experience and a touch of gray in his hair. He has been both the world's richest man and its biggest philanthropist. His influence spans from how we use computers to how the world fights diseases to how society debates the role of big tech. What is the legacy of Bill Gates? In pure numbers, it's staggering. Under his leadership, Microsoft enabled the personal computing revolution that put billions of PCs and later smartphones into people's hands. By 2017, over 2 billion devices ran Windows. The company he co-founded now touches virtually every enterprise and many homes on the planet. Financially, Gates held the title of world's richest person for 18 out of 24 years from 1995 to 2017, but he chose to give much of it away, donating more than $50 billion to charitable causes over his lifetime. Through the Gates Foundation, it's estimated tens of millions of lives have been saved or improved. Child mortality worldwide has plummeted from 12 million deaths a year in 1990 to about 5 million by the late 2010s. Thanks in part to vaccine access that the foundation aggressively championed, polio is nearly eradicated. Millions more people in Africa can grow enough food or access mobile banking or get life-saving medicines due to initiatives Gates funded. Tesla also pioneered new sales models and turned cars into software-centric devices that improve via updates. The company's market value at one point exceeded the combined value of several legacy automakers, reflecting investor belief in Tesla's tech advantage. In terms of impact on climate, Tesla has put millions of zero-emission vehicles on the road, contributing significantly to the fight against climate change. One of Gates's famous sayings is, "We always overestimate what will change in the next 2 years and underestimate what will change in the next 10. Don't be lulled into inaction by short-term thinking. Plan for the long haul." This ethos has proven true over and over. In the 1970s, people thought PCs were a fad. 2 decades later, they were everywhere. In the 90s, many dismissed the internet. A decade later, it was ubiquitous. Gates urges us to look to the horizon, whether it's in technology, education, or climate action. Of course, Gates's legacy is not without controversy or complexity. He is a human being with flaws. He drove his teams hard and could be harsh on colleagues. He admits he needed to mellow out over time. He missed certain trends. For example, Microsoft failed to dominate the smartphone revolution, something Gates later called his greatest mistake. And like any public figure, he faced personal challenges, including a very public divorce in 2021. But in the grand tally of things, Bill Gates has used his time and fortune in a way few others ever have, relentlessly directed at making an impact. As we look to the future, Gates is still very much active. He's not coding in a garage anymore, but you can find him touring a clean energy startups lab, or talking with school children about computers, or briefing lawmakers on pandemic preparedness. He has stepped back from the company he built, entrusting a new generation of tech leaders. But he hasn't stepped back from thinking big. If anything, freed from business duties, he thinks bigger than ever, about the fate of the planet, the trajectory of innovation, the promise of AI, which he calls as fundamental as the PC and internet were, and the necessity of global cooperation. Conclusion: coding a lasting legacy. Bill Gates often says he's an optimist, and that optimism is rooted in history. He's seen how far and fast progress can happen when brilliant minds and resources converge on hard problems. From a scrappy teenager writing code in a basement, to a CEO presiding over the dawn of the digital age, to a global philanthropist orchestrating the defeat of ancient diseases. Gates's life is a testament to the power of foresight and tenacity. In an interview, Gates once reflected, "I've been very lucky, and I feel a responsibility to make the most of that luck, to give back, to take on the big fights. Not everyone will agree on the methods, but few can dispute the scale of his impact." He imagined a world with a computer on every desk, and we live in that world now. He imagined eradicating diseases that have plagued humanity for millennia, and we stand today on the verge of eradicating polio with others to hopefully follow. He has always looked ahead to the next goal, the next innovation. As the sun sets on this chapter of technological revolution and rises on a new era of challenges, Gates's legacy lights a path forward. It's a legacy that teaches us to think big, act boldly, and care deeply about the world. Whether you're an entrepreneur dreaming up a startup in a garage, or a scientist in a lab, or a student with a head full of ideas, Gates's story encourages you to believe that a crazy vision can be made real with enough perseverance. It reminds us that being brilliant is great, but being ethical and generous amplifies brilliance into something that benefits all of humanity. In the end, Bill Gates coding a legacy isn't just about one man's code or spreadsheets or charitable grants. It's about a vision of the future, seeing it, building it, and sharing its rewards. Gates himself puts it simply: don't underestimate what can be done in 10 years. If we take anything from his journey, let it be that call to action. Think long-term, tackle the impossible, and always keep an eye on what's coming next. The future is a code yet to be written, and as Bill Gates has shown us, we are all potential coders of the legacy we leave behind.